Welcome back, and joining me for a closer look at the day's markets action is Stephen Schultz from Momentum. Thank you so much for your time, Stephen. The JSE really, I thought, was going to end off significantly in the green, but only ended up about 1/10%. But actually quite nice gains that we saw on the local currency front, now below 19 Rand against the US dollar. Is there anything specific that is buoying investor sentiment at this point, and maybe particularly on the local currency?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it was a bit of a fickle day of dip buying. We saw a lot larger volumes go through the US, and in that respect, South Africa somewhat disappointing. But we did see the JSE all-share managed to squeeze out some small gains. And as you've correctly mentioned, the South African Rand, the big winner, doesn't quite feel like it's justified calling it a winner, close on 19 Rand to the dollar, but an exceptionally strong US dollar. And I guess the big fears in the market all are not self-inflicted, but rather relate to the US, and particularly the strength of the US economy that we've seen over the last couple of days.
Well, let's actually go into the US. I mean, you mentioned, of course, that there were bigger volumes in the US markets. Could it be the producer inflation print that came out cooler than what markets had anticipated? And maybe could it be that there's optimism on what we could see with the consumer inflation coming out tomorrow?
I think the strong start to the US trading day, which is just underway now, would certainly suggest a bit of optimism. But I think if we look at the past week's worth of developments, definitely the producer numbers are encouraging in the sense that they're a little bit softer, and that follows the strong jobs data that we saw last week. But really what the US is currently in the process of digesting is a very robust US economy. Jobs data really suggesting that the US is finding its solid footing. And what that really means is the Fed now has very little wiggle room to cut rates. The market's essentially repriced to 0 to 25 basis points cuts for the entire 2025. We're seeing a lot stronger or higher long-dated bond yields in the US, which is really pulling money out of some of the emerging markets, including South Africa. Yeah. And unfortunately, it seems that everyone wants to be trading the US at the moment, with no exception. That's off the back of high valuations.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people were trading MTN today because that share price was up over 10%. I went to look at Sense because I thought that maybe they came out with some news, some announcement, but there was actually nothing. Have you heard anything in the investment corners?
I have indeed. So MTN did certainly catch a decent bid today, and it seems that the excitement there relates to its Nigerian business, and rumors that seem to be confirmed by the Nigerian government that tariff increases are imminent. That comes after 11 years of lobbying for increases in Nigeria, and Nigeria is a particularly important market for MTN. It represents about a third of its revenue. What we don't know is the extent to those increases, and also how consumers will respond. Naturally, consumers are under pressure, so higher tariffs mean probably less usage, but definitely a step in the right direction. And at a 10.5% gain on the day, the market, I think, agrees.
All right. Well, talking about direction, Reinet has actually decided to go in the direction of exiting its investment in British American Tobacco. We also did see a surge in that share price today of about 7%. What actually does this mean for Reinet?
I think it's once upon a time it would have been unthinkable for the likes of management, but what we've seen is a full disposal of British American Tobacco shares. It's about 2% of BAT's market cap, but about 24% of Reinet's net asset value, NAV, so not immaterial. They will be exiting. It's done through an accelerated book build, so an institutional trade. It's probably going to be somewhere in the region of 1.2 billion pounds sterling, so quite a sizable amount, and management are committed to reinvesting those proceeds. But fundamentally changes the investment vehicle and the assets that one will be holding. So it'll be interesting to see what assets they pick up now with all the proceeds.
Yeah.
But I think a very interesting development, and clearly unlocking some of that discount to NAV.
Okay, I get the benefits also that Reinet is going to accrue from this. But now on the BAT front, because I actually looked at that share price, that was down almost 3%. Could there be maybe some concern from the market about BAT's growth trajectory going forward if such a big investor can just leave?
I certainly see that because I think that the likes of Reinet was one of the stalwart investors. So once unthinkable. But I do think it could potentially be somewhat of an overreaction. It's essentially 2% of the shares that will be put on the market. A 3% drop in the value today is already overdone, in my opinion.
All right. Well, let's get to your stock pick for today, Stephen. What are you choosing?
So it is the once sprawling business that is Grindrod. More recently sold off some of its non-core assets and paid off debt and returned to its primary disciplines of infrastructure and logistics. It's got rail assets which stand to benefit from South Africa opening up to third-party providers. So I think that is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the company. The other one is the ports business, and that is Maputo in South Africa. With the political unrest that we've seen recently in Mozambique, I think the share price has corrected and perhaps it's been somewhat overdone.
Yeah.
Should we see some sort of stability return in Mozambique over the coming weeks, and hopefully that is the case, I think that Grindrod stands to re-rate and certainly benefit. So not without risks, but in my opinion, definitely worth considering.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, really giving us insight on what has moved investors' money today. That was Stephen Schultz from Momentum.